Welcome back, everybody, to the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. This week, we cover this year's 2025 elections. What did we learn from them? Another big AI deal in the market. New jobs being created by AI. Even the Washington Post admits. How about that? Glimmers of hope on the government shutdown. Just glimmers so far. We'll see. And the price of Bitcoin dropped below 100K, a little surprising, and then rebounded back up above it very quickly. That and more. Remember to follow me on X at MorganSternNJ. Follow the pod on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, wherever you get your podcasts. Okay, Zach, let's get into it. Should we start with the election?
Yes, we are going to start with this week's amazing 2025 elections. I think people often forget that there are consequential elections that happen in odd number years. Not in every state necessarily, but even in Texas here, there were some ballot measures on the ballot initiatives that were on there, some property tax stuff and those sorts of things. Brian, like in your case, you're from New Jersey, you live in Virginia, there were big gubernatorial races, you lived in New York for a period of time, and there was a big mayoral race that got a lot of attention. So there's those big ticket items or those big ticket elections that we see that get a lot of the news. And then there's some interesting stuff down the ballot that we're going to talk about as well. So Brian, what are your key takeaways from Tuesday's elections and maybe framing it for our audience, what do those results mean for energy, AI, Bitcoin, and then the road to the 2026 midterms?
The cost of living, including energy prices, are top of mind for voters. And several different exit polls showed that it was the number one issue in each of these jurisdictions by far. Now, I want to pair that with this. The number one area of growth in the U.S. economy has been big tech AI investments, data centers. Now, in certain areas where those projects are booming, the neighbors are not feeling the benefits yet. The shareholders are, the stocks are doing well, but the people actually in the communities, some of them, not all, some of them are not feeling it. They're not really supporting it. Take, for example, where I live now. Data Center Alley in Virginia is very nearby, one of the largest concentrations of data centers in the entire world. The state representative, we call them delegates here, was voted out of office. The challenger spoke explicitly about slowing down data center growth. Look at Georgia, where they had public service commission seats on the ballot. A lot of data center projects going up in Georgia. Both the incumbent Republicans and the Democrat challengers spoke about bringing down power bills. The incumbents were supportive of data centers, the challengers not so much. The challengers won. This is a key area of growth for the entire economy of the country. But if local projects don't get approvals, the growth won't continue apace. And so it will be critical for the companies in this space to work hard to win the approval of the communities. We've said it here before, hire local, work with the community to make sure power bills are brought down, improve the quality of life for your neighbors, and you will continue to grow. If you don't, you risk supportive local officials getting voted out and your approvals going away. Look, I think it's an important wake-up call for the industry. This is eminently fixable, but you have to put in the work. At Riot, we do that. We hire local, we site our facilities away from residential areas, we invest in local projects, we donate to local organizations, we held town halls and other events to build relationships and alleviate people's concerns. This is the way to ensure progress on this national priority. Now, in terms of the macro, let's zoom out a little bit. So it was a big night for the Democrats, blue states, of course, Virginia, New Jersey, pretty blue. New York City, very blue. But you look at those Georgia races, not that blue. Of course, we had the California redistricting, of course, very, very blue. An overarching theme in these off-year elections is repudiation of whoever's in the White House. You look at 4 years ago, 2021, Joe Biden was the president. Glenn Youngkin was elected in Virginia. Of course, there's sort of lightning in a bottle with education issues there for him. But nevertheless, the conditions were good enough for a Republican to win in Virginia. Jack Ciattarelli was also the candidate in New Jersey for governor. He barely lost by a whisper, and he had no campaign money, comparatively speaking. I think he was outspent like 10-1. Had no RNC support. Nobody thought he would come even close. He darn near pulled it off because people were not very happy with the Biden administration at that time. So overarching theme is people tend to vote against the president in these off-year elections. But I come back to the fact that cost of living, and in particular energy bills, were very hot button issues in these elections. In Virginia, everybody had to talk about it. In New Jersey, the candidates had to talk about it at every stop. So you really do have to take from this election that cost of living is still top of mind. Remember, they elected President Trump. People had a lot of anxiety about inflation. They still have the anxiety, and so they're blaming whoever's in charge, and they want them to do better. There's a lot of criticism, I think, from the right towards Biden, because he essentially was saying to the voters, don't believe your gut or how you feel. Believe my wonderful statistics. That was not a very good approach. The way people are feeling and the way they're experiencing things matters, and you need to be in touch with that. And I think this is a good illustration. I think Pomp, we cite Pomp so frequently because he's so frequently right. But he used a chart, I guess, in his newsletter from Adam Kobeisi, showing that grocery prices have risen over 5% at year over year as of July 2025. Remember, target inflation rate from the Fed is 2%. That is 2.5 times the target inflation rate for the stuff people buy every day. You look at housing affordability, housing prices have exploded. And since 2019, so pre-pandemic to today, this is just a stunning statistic. It would take a 38% drop in home prices or a 60% jump in income to reach the housing affordability level of 6 years ago. That is stunning. And that's why people have anxiety, because look, it's supposed to be, one of the biggest shares of your income goes to your housing costs. I think usually, a financial advisor will tell you 28 to 33%, somewhere in that ballpark of your income generally would go to housing costs, and you'd still be kind of in a strong financial position. If that's the kind of the biggest share of your expenses, and it's gone up that much in proportion to your income, that's going to put a stress on every other part of your life. So that's what people are feeling. And this is what I think successful politicians will focus on: solutions to this cost of living problem. And energy prices are included in that. They have been a big discussion for voters across the country, particularly in some of these jurisdictions where data centers are proliferating. Whether they're causing the rises in energy bills or not, I think is very debatable, but people believe it. So we have to deal with that perception. Perception is reality, right? Now, I'll dig in a little bit to each of these races, unless you want to chime in on any of that rant that I just talked at you, and then I'll dive into each race separately.
No, your commentary is spot on, and one of the things that's interesting is in that graph, which we threw up on the screen, it shows by state the change in percentage. And one thing that was interesting for us is we recently went back to Iowa, where I'm from. We had a family funeral, and that's one of the things my wife commented on was when she went to the grocery store, like how much more expensive it seemed like things were in Iowa compared to grocery stores here in Texas. And that graph seems to bear that out, that there's a higher, growth in change in grocery prices, and those things really they're real for people. It was I think it was like right after the election, Morning Joe, and they were on there, and he was talking about he didn't understand that butter was like $7 or something like that. And it blew his mind that those sort of things were expensive. And then the other thing I'll just throw in just for fun, made me smile when you were talking about how much people spend on their housing. My wife is a big Dave Ramsey fan, and he says 25% is what you should be spending on housing. And so that even goes for people that adhere to a lower threshold, that that change in prices that exacerbates that even more. And we're in an interesting place where we're in our late 30s. We're own. This is the second home that we've owned, but there are people just younger than us that really like, it's like, I'm not trying to be too hyperbolic, but they really are concerned and almost despair their ability to buy a house, particularly in a market, like Austin, which went kind of nuts, during COVID. So all of that to say is that sense, that feeling, that's real for real people. It's real for us. So that's great analysis that you had overall.
Thank you. Okay. I want to dive into a little bit of the specifics of these races, particularly what they might mean for going forward for Bitcoin, AI, data center, for digital infrastructure. So I mentioned the Virginia delegate who represents Data Center Alley was voted out, and his opponent talked about slowing down data center growth. It is what it is. The governor-elect, Abigail Spanberger, here's what she's talking about on energy policy. It's actually fairly reasonable. I think she is focusing on real world solutions rather than playing the blame game or kind of appealing to people's base emotions. Some of her points here seems to be supportive of pretty much all of the above energy. We have some issues with wind and how it kind of messes up the grid with how intermittent it is. So that's, one caveat I would say. But it's interesting to me that she seems to be supporting this decentralized energy theme, which I have heard from other smart people, like, Chamath on the All In Pod, for example. And what I mean by like decentralized energy is not necessarily relying on just a big power plant and then transmitting it to everyone. She's talking about solar panels in parking lots or on roofs. She's talking about locating small modular reactors at various sites that need a lot of power, bringing the power to the load, in essence, rather than relying on these bulk power systems, which are often out of date, require large transmission infrastructure investments that take years and years to complete. So she seems to be kind of supporting this decentralized power theme, which, to be frank, I don't think we're there yet on the technology, but we're progressing, I think, faster today than we have in the past. The joke, with SMRs or, other nuclear sources was they're always a decade away. Now we could be looking at 12 to 18 months having some nuclear power available, particularly in these SMRs, which they say that's like fourth generation tech is very safe. There's, various solutions that may be coming on. If battery tech advances strongly, which it seems to be, actually, it seems to be one of the highest growth sources of generation interconnects in the country. If battery catches up and we can figure out the supply chain for more solar panels, it's possible that we have this more decentralized power, and that is one way that we close the energy gap. So Spanberger seems to support that. One thing for the data center space to pay attention to, she wants data centers to pay for generation and transmission infrastructure to power themselves. That is very expensive and typically socialized across the market. There are elements of this that are happening, though, in the marketplace. And just one snapshot that you and I have discussed is, for example, when Riot builds a facility, we usually pay for a lot of the energy infrastructure upgrades. And then the question is, who owns the substation, for example? Like, is it the utility? Is it the person who built it? And one possible solution is, well, we'll pay for the upgrade that everyone in the area will benefit from. And then essentially the utility buys it by giving credits over a period of time, over the life of the asset. So in essence, we paid for all this many, many millions of dollars of infrastructure, and then we kind of get paid back for it slowly over time. That's one possible solution. So she says this, it feels a little redistribution-y, I guess, but there are instances where this is happening in the market because these large CapEx investments are necessary for the businesses to work and to start monetizing. And so sometimes these corporations are willing to fund the build out for the benefit of all in order to get their businesses online faster. So it is a possible solution. She focuses on energy efficiency goals for utilities. I think what's underlying this also may not be, it makes some sense. Here's why. The grids across the country have excess power like 98% of the time. It's only 2% of the time when every single person has their air conditioner on or every single person has their home heating on when you're actually running up against that peak demand. So it's about how can we use what we have more efficiently. I think the very optimistic view is that batteries are going to really catch up and be super useful here. And so you can use underutilized power for things like Bitcoin mining to fund infrastructure upgrades. You can use batteries to capture some of that excess power, and then you have it when you need that peak demand. I don't know if that's what's underlying it. That's my interpretation of it. And if I'm right, then that's okay. That's pretty reasonable. She advocates for an opt-in consumer demand response program. Good and bad. The good is that big companies like here in Texas, or in Texas, steel mills, chemical plants, Bitcoin miners, they can do demand response. So if they're not using all, or if you're reaching peak demand, they can participate in grid programs, basically sell control of their load to the grid. They can sell power into the wholesale market. There's other solutions available to them. Why can't your everyday consumer essentially give some power back and get credits on their bill? That's the good. The bad is this is typically implemented by Big Brother. You, in essence, have a smart control on your thermostat that like the grid operator or the power company is operating, and they're turning your power on and off or up and down. Don't love that. It's a little creepy. It's a little Big Brothery. It is happening in some places. I'm not sure about the effectiveness of it or not, but it is an idea that is, like I said, it has pluses and minuses, and it would, on balance, lead to less stress on the grid. Faster permitting for new projects. Everyone seems to support that. Whether she can deliver on that is another issue. We'll see. Virginia, I believe, is in PJM, or is it, I forget which ISO we're in here, but there's only so much power the governor has on faster permitting. But good that she supports it. She also supports a very redistribution-y thing, which is having a limit on how much the power bills can be for people of like low, moderate income, and then redistributing the excess costs to everybody else, which just means you're going to have some people paying for other people's power bills. I don't love that. But I totally get why it's politically popular. So anyway, some goods and bads. Overall, pretty reasonable, actually looking for real world solutions to the problem from the Spanberger camp. We'll see if she adheres to her campaign promises on these things, number one, in pursuing them, and number two, on whether she can deliver them. But overall, seeking real world solutions. Now let's shift to my former home state of New Jersey, where the energy policy appears to be a complete and total dumpster fire, in my opinion. She wants to basically just play the blame game and not actually pursue solutions in the way that Spanberger is trying to. She wants to declare an energy emergency and freeze energy prices. Price controls. Where have we heard that before? And how has our experience gone with price controls? Not great. That is how you create scarcity. That is how you achieve the opposite of your desired outcome, which is more cheap, abundant power. That's not a good idea. She wants to speed up permitting, but particularly for clean energy, does not have as much of a focus on, for example, natural gas, which would be faster, still clean, more efficient. She does want to focus on solar and nuclear. I think she's going to still support these offshore wind projects in New Jersey, which everyone hates. They're ugly. They kill the whales. They don't produce enough power at all. They're totally intermittent. The wind's not necessarily blowing when you need it. So that's unfortunate. She wants to sue PJM, the system operator. She accuses them of mismanagement. I don't know what she expects to accomplish there. And she supports the one piece that she seems to share with Spanberger. She wants to support solar and batteries for this kind of decentralized energy approach, bringing the power to the load. I think New Jersey's in for a rough ride on their power prices. That's not great. Of course, then we go to New York City, where it is completely pie in the sky nonsense from the Islamo-communist mayor-elect who he says he wants to use public land to generate power. What are you going to put solar panels in Central Park? That doesn't make any sense. He wants to electrify everything, including the free buses. He wants to decarbonize every building and everything. Where do you think electricity comes from? I mean, it's going to come from fracking, which he opposes. Natural gas is going to come from a combination of things. Coal, it's going to come from maybe some solar and batteries. Hydro, there's a huge hydro facility in upstate New York. It's going to come from a variety of things. He wants to limit the options, basically, and have everything publicly run. So no profit motive, no motive for efficiency, no path to cheap, abundant energy. New Yorkers, God bless you. You're in for a rough ride. Okay, Georgia. We mentioned that public service commissioners were defeated by the challengers, Republican incumbents defeated by the Democrat challengers. The number one platform item was power bills that both incumbents and challengers talked about. The voters decided the incumbents weren't doing a good enough job. They voted for the challengers. Big issue in Georgia is the influx of data centers. The communities I mentioned don't seem to be feeling the benefits right now that the shareholders are, and that dissatisfaction, I think, carried over into this election. It's a big lesson for candidates on both sides to take, and for the companies building these facilities to take, which is love thy neighbor. Make sure you are having a positive impact on your neighbors, or else they're going to vote out the supportive politicians and vote in politicians who are going to hinder your business growth. This is how things work in a democratic society. That's a key lesson for Georgia. Then, of course, California voted in a redistricting plan to wipe out 5 Republicans and put in 5 Democrats. That means that California, which votes 40% Republican, is going to have like 7% Republican representation in Congress. Not Democratic, small d Democratic, I don't think, but here we are. On the redistricting fight nationally, the Republicans are still in the lead pretty significantly. They have, 5 seats in Texas. That's kind of canceled out by the 5 seats in California, but they're going to pick up at least 4 in other states and probably more than that. They'll probably end up, I think the count currently as we sit today is like 4 more Republican seats than Democrat seats. But there are a number of states where there's ongoing redistricting efforts where I think the Republicans could get a little bit more of an advantage. Here's the caveat for really anyone running for office. If it is a change wave year, none of this tinkering around the edges is going to matter. If it's a trickle, remember in 2022, it was supposed to be the Republican red wave. They were going to sweep into power and win a gazillion seats. It didn't really happen. They have a very narrow majority. If it's another trickle year, then the Republicans probably keep the House. If it's a wave year, like a 40-seat swing or more, like we saw 94 when the Republicans took over, or 2010, or I think 2018, Democrats did well. If it's a big sweeping year, the tinkering around the edges is just not going to determine the majority. If it's a trickle instead of a wave, then this redistricting fight, I would say, advantage Republicans. We will see. It is a year away, which is an eternity. Remember, President Trump won every swing state 1 year ago. And then this year, the Democrats won every election that was taking place. Granted, mostly in blue areas, not entirely in blue areas. So we'll see. We have a long way to go. Okay. I think I've exhausted my thoughts on the election, unless there's anything else you can think of.
You covered it well. And we talked, I think it was yesterday or maybe this morning before we recorded, but I mean, there's history, and there's just electoral results that go back decades, hundreds of years, that in these sort of off-season or midterm elections, there's often this tendency to push back against the party in power. And that's not unique to Republicans or Democrats. It happens to both sides. These election results are interesting in that the key states in which the big Democrat wins happened were in blue states. The one thing that was interesting is NBC exit polls were saying that that. So whatever the threshold that the Democrat won, it was 60-40 or whatever it was, the disapproval of President Trump was less than let's say the approval for the Democrat. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic in there as well, that it's a pure repudiation of Donald Trump specifically. The president himself has had some very hot takes on this, tying in the shutdown and all these sort of things. But I think you covered everything well. And the other thing too for listeners is like, it's so easy to get caught up in the immediacy of like, hey, this news just broke now. It just broke this week. It's very fresh. For some people, it's very exciting. For the other half of the country, it's raw. Like, it's going to take a long time for policies to change. Who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what energy bills are going to look like in Georgia in November 2026, or in New Jersey, or New York or California, or all across the country. We'll see. So all of that to say is, what we see now and what we feel now, there's going to be other political issues that come up and that sort of subsume this, and that will be a bigger focus or foci for the 2026 election. So we can't necessarily we can't extrapolate, let's say, necessarily these results from 2025 out into the 2026 midterms, but tune in. We will see. Well, we also trying to transition away from the election and talk about some other substantive issues. There is daylight on the horizon, and no, it's not because we set our clocks back an hour. There is news of a possible deal to end the longest government shutdown. Now, when we were preparing our notes in the last day or two, it seemed like the light was potentially a little brighter in the last, since the elections. But Brian, what is the latest on that?
Yeah, I'll believe it when I see it, I think. But the reports are that there's some negotiations happening where there could be enough Senate Democrats prepared to open the government with a short-term CR in exchange for a promised vote on these Obamacare tax credits, which is what they've been hanging their hat on. We will see. We have President Trump really blaming the shutdown for Republican losses, which, whether or not he's right, does kind of weaken the Republican negotiating position and signal that maybe he's interested in a deal on this stuff. Interestingly, on the Dem side, the federal unions have been saying just end it and just do the CR and reopen and deal with these other issues later. Left-leaning groups have been saying, no, fight, fight, fight. So this discussion of talks that they could pass a CR and then negotiate on the Obamacare tax credits is exactly what I predicted would be the ultimate end of the shutdown. I don't really see another possible way that this ends, but whether that happens tomorrow or in a week or in a month is anybody's guess. We've talked about the inflection points. You had troop paychecks, you had the SNAP program, you had the Obamacare open enrollment period starting. These have all been inflection points coming up. Now the FAA is saying they're going to have to reduce flights by 10% starting the next several days. Then I think you're going to have Thanksgiving travel, which I think ultimately is going to be probably the backstop here. I'd be a little surprised if it goes into that, because everyone's going to have egg on their face at that point. You're just going to have millions of angry Americans if they can't get their act together by Thanksgiving. So I continue to predict that the outcome is going to be a CR with a promised vote on the Obamacare tax credits at some not so distant future date. I think that's always been the only viable option. And I think the pressure point here is probably going to be Thanksgiving travel at this point. We'll see if my prediction's right or not. Here we sit, it's November 6th. This will come out on November 7th. So perhaps in the next week or two, we get there. Again, maybe it's tomorrow, maybe it's in a week, maybe it's in 2 weeks. We'll see. But I think that's the probable outcome. So we'll see. I don't know. Longest shutdown ever. Record. Yay.
Another big deal for a Bitcoin turning AI company. Microsoft and Iron reached a nearly $10 billion deal over 5 years, with Iron stocks up almost 10% since the news broke last week. And this is an incredible statistic. I saw it. This isn't an article. This is not me. over 580% in 2025 alone. That is nuts. So Brian, the good news keeps on coming for this sort of business model. What are your thoughts on it?
The main source of growth in the American economy right now is big tech investments in AI infrastructure, data centers. The main ingredient for this infrastructure is power. Who has approved, functioning, large-scale interconnections? Bitcoin miners. So these deals should keep coming and be very valuable for the companies involved and their shareholders. The pessimists tell you it's a bubble, but the earnings keep coming in very strong. So if the proof continues to be in the pudding, I think the bears will be proven wrong and the bulls will be proven right. You look at some of the other data points here. Riot, of course, has announced a pivot to AI HPC infrastructure. It's up 100% this year. TeraWulf is up 160%. Cypher is up 360%. So the sector is starting to get some credit for these deals, and I think there's more of them to come. So the retail stockholders are doing well. Ks that might have them are doing well. The big passive investments, you're seeing some more long active investments coming in. This is all bullish. So I don't think the evidence so far supports the bears. I think it supports the bulls, and these are just more data points that point in that direction. So that's my take on that.
Good. All right. And next up, also on the AI front, this was a really interesting story. And as you mentioned in the outset, it was in the Washington Post of all the places in all the world for this story to be in. So many articles that we read are kind of doom and gloom about how AI is displacing the workforce. Senators Hawley and Warner introduced a bill to require like large companies and the government to report to the Department of Labor a certain AI related job data, things like layoffs and hires. What's the impact of AI on your company workforce? But this article, it talks very plainly about 16 unique roles that AI has created, real roles. So it was very interesting. What are your takeaways, Brian, from this article?
This article is bullish for the labor market, but not bullish enough, because it just talks about really direct AI jobs. So they don't even talk about the trade jobs that are going to be necessary: the electricians, the electrical engineers, the construction, all of the various jobs to actually create this infrastructure. They don't even talk about that. They just talk about jobs that will deal with the use of AI. So good article. Glad to see the Washington Post is, not being a doomer on this subject. I actually think they even undershoot the positive impact that the sector is going to have on the job market. So they look at Walmart, KPMG, Salesforce, and Workday, and they look at various job titles. We've talked before about how the car replaced the jobs of the horse and buggy drivers, right? So here, you have, since 2020, according to LinkedIn, I think it's 20%. I have to refer to the article. I think it's like 20% of job titles didn't exist 25 years ago. So think about that. So now here's some of the areas where they discuss in the article where it's completely new positions that didn't used to exist. You have user experience jobs that bridge the interaction between humans and the digital products, between the AI. You have AI conversation designer, knowledge architect, interaction designer, AI artist engineer, a prompt engineer. So that's one segment. You have workforce and business operations jobs, managing how a company and its workforce operate. Human AI collaboration lead is now a title. Adoption strategist. Okay, you have technical jobs: a responsible use AI architect, an orchestration engineer, an AI architect, a data annotator to make sure that the information is going to be accurate. Some supervisory roles. You have head of AI, agent operations manager for this agentic revolution that may come to fruition, senior vice president of AI strategy, executive vice president of AI. Think about that. You have to have leaders who are experts in this, but it's so new that we're really just going to be training people who used to do other stuff to do this, or offering them more money than their current job to come and learn how to lead this space. So the headline is AI reshapes the job market. Here are 16 roles it created. That's only 16. Like, they're just scratching the surface here. There are so many different jobs that we have a shortage of people to fill. I just think this is very bullish for the job market. I know the numbers have been choppy lately. We've had the stock market going up, but the job numbers going down or chopping along. This is just one anecdote to show that the job market is going to do very well in this AI revolution. And glad to see Washington Post supporting it. I don't know that they're usually the biggest employment market bulls, but this is a very bullish sign. Of course, their owner is Jeff Bezos, so maybe I'm unfairly criticizing their normal takes. But I was glad to see at least one bullish article out of the mainstream media about the job market as it relates to AI. So good news. Glad to see it.
It is very exciting, and we'll continue to try to find some of those stories that are a little more optimistic about AI, and particularly AI in the workforce, because I think that's where you do find a lot of the dour coverage and headlines. So we'll keep an eye out for some of those positive, uplifting stories, and for everyone else out there, keep polishing up your skills, because there's, as Brian mentioned, there's a significant portion of jobs that didn't exist 5, 10, 20 years ago that we need to train up people for, and that's in these sort of like white collar jobs. But it's all those other jobs you said they're going to support the infrastructure that builds and maintains all of this. Well, for our final substantive segment, we're going to discuss the price of Bitcoin, which briefly did drop below 100,000 for the first time in many months. And some articles are showing signs of concern or even panic. We've got one headline that I'll throw up here that's a very panicky headline, but others like Pomp have a more reasoned take, or just pro Bitcoin take. But Brian, what are your kind of thoughts overall on this recent price drop in Bitcoin, some of the factors that may be contributing to it?
Yeah, so I'll steal a sentiment and then expound on it from Pomp and Jordy Vesser, who they discussed on the Pomp podcast. This could be a signal that it's sort of Bitcoin's IPO moment. And in essence, you had people who were early adopters. So think of it as your seed investors, or your early private investors in an asset that then IPOs. In this case, I think we're talking about the ETFs, and we're talking about Bitcoin treasury companies, things like that. They get to a certain market price where they're ready to harvest their profits and then explore some other growth area. So we know that people do puts and calls, and when Bitcoin hits a new all-time high, it often drops after that because a lot of people hit their price order number and they sell a lot. We saw Galaxy in the month of September sold $9 billion, single whale. So I think you had this moment where a lot of the early adopters wanted to harvest their profits, sell it to a whole lot of people. And when you have more selling than normal, of course, you're going to see a price drop. That doesn't mean it's going to stay there. Okay. I say the IPO moment, think of, I bought Apple stock like before the iPhone, and then it goes way up. People harvest profits, they sell, it goes down, it continues to go up as long as the asset that you're investing in has the right innovation plan or the right growth plan. It's still going to go up again, even if it drops temporarily. In Bitcoin's case, it is a supply capped asset, and we barely scratched the surface of human, institutional, and sovereign adoption. There's still more demand to be had than supply. So I will adopt their view that it's sort of an IPO moment right now with a lot of early adopters harvesting profits. That doesn't mean there isn't more growth to be had from those who participate in this transfer of ownership, who build their positions now. Because as I said, as more individuals, corporations, sovereigns acquire more Bitcoins, the supply of 21 million is never changing. So there will be more demand than supply. So it will go up over time. And Bitcoin's a $2 trillion market. The gold market is 20 trillion. So if people are looking for sound money investments that won't inflate away, this is your next generation asset. And so I think the future is bright. I think a temporary lull is okay. And it's not unlike a situation that is kind of unwound over the last year or two, where you had large institutions, particularly hedge funds, would go long on Bitcoin and then short the Bitcoin mining stocks, which used to be a proxy for Bitcoin for people who just wanted to invest in the market rather than actual Bitcoin. And so you had the price of mining stocks lower than I think they otherwise would have been as the price of Bitcoin rose. So the correlation between the price of Bitcoin and the mining stocks was broken by these sorts of trades. Likewise, now I think you have profit harvesting that is sort of interrupting the typical rise in the price of Bitcoin in Q4, which has been the historic pattern. So if you believe in the concept of Bitcoin, a limited supply digital asset, it's more portable and usable than gold, then I think you should hang in there, hodl, and the future will be bright. But it kind of makes sense that sometimes people harvest profits in one investment and want to then do other stuff. So hopefully that's my reasoned take that I am partially ripping off from people who are smarter than me. Those are my thoughts.
Good. And we'll see where it is in 2 months as we cross into the new year, and 4 years when we, cross into the next decade. And this little blip will probably be largely forgotten. Well, we're going to move on to our final two segments, our kind of fun segments of the week. The next one is called Is the Headline. I'll provide the context of an actual news story, and then we'll each supply a made-up headline. So story number one, President Trump is always must-see TV, including his recent appearance on 60 Minutes, which drew the most eyeballs since January 2021, which was also a story about Donald Trump. They covered a range of topics from regime change in Venezuela to immigration enforcement to the government shutdown, and even his pardon of the Binance co-founder. It's also noteworthy, kind of funny, but it's noteworthy because President Trump sued and then later settled with CBS's parent company for $16 million over the concerns about how it handled and edited an interview with then candidate Kamala Harris. And that really must have struck a nerve because Democrats like Chuck Schumer were floating the idea of filing complaints against the FCC for Trump's unhinged behavior. And of course, unhinged behavior is the sort of key trigger for an FCC investigation. So Brian, President Trump goes on 60 Minutes. He boosts the ratings. What's the headline?
Headline is Trump builds 60 Minutes back better. Biden could never. Yeah, he sues them. He takes $16 million from them, and then he probably made them more than $16 million by doing an interview with them. Seems like a fair trade. Good for them.
Yes. Good for them. And now it's that money's probably being used to tear down the East Wing and build the ballroom.
I think he's going to build his presidential library, actually.
Okay, the presidential library.
Brought to you by the fake news media.
Yes. Well, my headline, it's very long, but mine was failed late night hosts cave and beg Trump to come on their shows, realize that he is their ticket to ratings, relevancy, and a paycheck.
True. Yeah. They never do better ratings wise than when he is in office. That is for sure.
Yes. All right. Story number two, no leading needed here. Zoran Mandami wins New York's mayoral election. Brian, what's the headline?
I'm just ripping off the Babylon Bee. Zoran Mandami now horrified to discover that he has a job. New York State Assemblyman is I think it's part-time. They meet very infrequently for a couple months and then they're out of session most of the time. He was a failed rapper before that. So I legit think mayor of the largest city in the United States is like his first actual job. Horrifying. Good luck, New York. You're going to need it.
Didn't know about the rap report. That's very interesting. We'll see Marshall Mathers coming to Detroit mayoral office near you. My headline was Socialist Mandami wins, annexes Trump Tower for rent-controlled housing. I think that was one of the takeaways is like for President Trump, it's going to be a sparring partner for the next 3 years. So I'm sure President Trump will have fun with this.
Yeah. God bless New Yorkers. I love that city. I lived there for 10 years. See what happens.
It'll be interesting to see in the weeks leading up to it, they would have like the mayor of like Boca Raton, Florida or something like that would come on there and talk
He's a
about
great guy. I'm friends with him. Scott Singer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's who it was. Okay. So it was really him. So he'd go on there and he'd talk about this is how many people left New York and moved down here. And all these cities like Boca Raton are going to, flourish and thrive. So it'll be interesting to see, because people they vote with their feet, they vote with their wallets. And I think that these types of things that has kind of been a thread throughout this whole show. It'll be interesting to see. You always get those big ticket things like when Hannity finally threw up his hands and left and went down to Florida. But it'll be interesting to see just for the average New Yorker what they ultimately decide to do. Okay, for our final segment, we'll end in the traditional way with the grab bag segment. And I've been pulling from the well of the World Series for about the last 3 or 4 weeks, it seems. Credit to the Dodgers. They did win an exciting Game 7. But for me, the ghosts, the goblins, and the witches are being stashed away, and Christmas lights are starting to go up in our neighborhood. I've even seen a few Santa inflatables, and there's actually a really cool one where there's like Santa's laying on the ground and there's a turkey standing on top of him saying, "Not now, fat man," reminding people that, Thanksgiving actually does come first. But Andy Williams was right. It is the most wonderful time of the year. And I'm usually the type of person that thinks you should wait until the day after Thanksgiving to start doing Christmas things, like things around the house, putting up Christmas trees and all that stuff. But for some reason, this year it's felt heavy and hard enough that I'm just happy to see Christmas decorations, Christmas lights, the little Christmas tree shaped little Debbie cakes. I love those. And even some Christmas movies are starting to come back on TV again. And thanks to the worst public policy decision in history, daylight saving time, the sun is now going down in the 5 o'clock hour. So seeing the neighborhood lit up at night for when you're still awake for 4 or 5 hours after the sun goes down is a fun thing to see. So looking forward to Christmas time, even here in balmy Texas.
You are a Christmas extremist, which is what I call my wife. She wants to put up the Christmas decorations, the day after Halloween. And I'm like, you cannot forget Thanksgiving. And if you do that, here's my position, is that you should wait till after Thanksgiving, because then that's a good amount of time to be enjoying Christmas music, Christmas movies, the decorations, everything else. Too much of a good thing, I think I would get tired of. Not tired of, you'd never get tired of Christmas really, but it's less, I don't know.
The joy wears off sooner.
Better.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You're entitled to your views, but I think you're a Christmas extremist. My grab bag item is our friends of the Bitcoin Voter Project. They put out a very good video titled "Your Legacy is Worth Saving. Choose Bitcoin." And it ties all the way back to our initial discussion and subsequent discussions about the cost of living and how people are feeling with this economy. The dollar's lost 33% of its value in the last couple decades. It's lost 25% of its value just in the last 5 years. Meanwhile, in the 15 years or so since Bitcoin was created, it's gone from $0 to $100,000. So if you want to hedge your bets against inflation, you want, again, modern day, more transportable, more useful gold, Bitcoin is your choice. And right now it is only 1/10 the market cap of gold. So if you believe that it is going to catch up, it's got a growth trajectory from there. So check out.
Graduation day is here. But why is Tommy so upset when Cynthia is on the moon? It all started a long time ago. In 2009, Tommy and Cynthia were born, and so was Bitcoin. Tommy's parents opened up his fiat savings account, while Cynthia's parents invested in Bitcoin. Over the years, the value of Bitcoin rose faster than Cynthia's shoe size, while Tommy's savings account can't keep up with inflation. had $1 in 2009, it is now worth 67 cents. At 1 Bitcoin in 2009, today it's worth over $100,000, outperforming all other assets. Your children matter, and so do their future. Thankfully, it's not too late. Bitcoin. Your legacy is worth saving.
Follow the Bitcoin Voter Project on X at Bitcoin Voter and think about it. Think about how you want to save for your family's future. So that is all for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Remember to follow me on X at MorgansternNJ. Like and subscribe. Follow us on Apple, YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble. We will see you all next week for another episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. Thanks, everybody.